Okay, hi, and good morning, everybody here from Finland. And gosh, it's just becoming summer. Very beautiful here. We're on program number 84, and we have begun a section regarding the externalization in the ashrams that are coming forth. And let's see, as a little segue, the purpose of the new group of world servers, they are completely dedicated to the service of humanity and to the establishing of right human relations under hierarchical impressions. Now, sometimes we wonder about the definition of the servers, and I think this is somehow a good description of who they are and what they do. So aspirants and quite a few disciples have diversified interests and only serve part-time. Okay, but the new group of world servers, these tend to be the higher types of probationary initiates. To all these groups is committed the task of implementing the work and directing the energies for which the Christ is responsible. Now we move on to number 84, and the objectives. The objectives of the hierarchy in this divine act of massed impression and stimulation are briefly three. Okay, so the objectives of the hierarchy. This is what we're talking about. And they do make their presence felt, and they impress those that can respond to them. So, briefly, three. To bring about those conditions which will make the coming of the Christ possible. The blended influence of these energies will bring about what may at first appear to be undesirable results, because the remaining opposition of the forces of evil is still active and must be overcome. This may necessitate drastic measures, but great good will eventually appear. So this is their first type of impression. And I wonder if in this pandemic that we are experiencing at the moment, we have something similar to this. Okay. Hierarchical, the establishing of right human relations under hierarchical impression, under hierarchical impression. That's what we're looking at here, and the mode of impression. So there is here a divine act of massed impression and stimulation. And the hierarchy has certain objectives in carrying this forward. So making the reappearance of the Christ possible, okay? Number two, to prepare the minds of men so that they may be ready for the influence of the avatar about whom the scriptures speak. He is called the avatar of synthesis, and his influence will be spread through the work and the activity of the Christ. This is an extra-planetary avatar, a great being who has linked himself up with our planetary logos. Okay. And what else? And the third point, well, we're not quite there yet, are we? It's coming. We have more to say. It must be remembered that synthesis is an aspect of the first divine characteristic. I think really the second aspect, akin to unity, but more thoroughgoing, reducing all things to sameness, regardless of their perception as being distinct. It is an aspect of the first divine characteristic, the will, or rather the will to good. When we have something called the will to good, it seems as if the second ray is combining with the first. This energy or influence which the Christ himself will wield, and for which he has been long preparing himself, produces cohesion. There is the law of cohesion. It's a second systemic law, a drawing together and a tendency to fusion and union. So cohesion, synthesis, unity, all of these are related concepts. The separateness of humanity and its selfishness had reached such vast proportions, and its effects were so completely dominated by the forces of evil, that in response to the mass inchoate demand of humanity, the hierarchy called for spiritual imposition or interposition. I guess, when things are really bad, we may not be aware of how bad they really are. The endless selfish propaganda in speech or in writing, most of it materialistic, nationalistic, and basically untrue and wrongly motivated, became such a clamor that it reached to the spheres usually impervious to the sounds of earth. The avatar of synthesis was called in to aid. So this brings us further in our understanding of why this great avatar appeared, apparently as a very necessary balancing factor. Okay. So the Christ has been long preparing himself to demonstrate an aspect of the will to and namely the will to good. And then the great avatar was called in by hierarchy, and perhaps it wouldn't surprise me that the planetary logos with whom the avatar linked up was part of this invocatory request. All right. The main objective and the immediate task of the Christ is to bring to an end the separateness which exists between man and man, family and family. I think of Romeo and Juliet, the Capulets and the Montagues, community and community, and nation. This is a simple statement and one that can be understood easily by the most ignorant. It is simple also in that it provides a practical objective and task for the smallest and the most unimportant of the sons of men. All can cooperate if they will. Bring to an end separateness. This is the Christ's major objective. And one that in a way sounds simple to state and is easily understood, but what about the task of accomplishment that has long lacked? It is nevertheless, says the Tibetan, a task which has required the mobilizing of the entire planetary hierarchy and the assistance also of a great being who would normally work on levels of consciousness higher than those on which the Christ and his disciples labor. So all of this easily said, easily understood, and accomplished only with great difficulty and through the mobilization of the entire hierarchy of the planet to assist the Christ. Normally, it's interesting that normally the sounds of humanity do not penetrate to the levels on which this avatar of synthesis works. Okay, now the further point number 3, and let's remember what we're doing here. We are talking about the objectives of the hierarchy as they carry out a divine act of mass impression. And so far, we have the purpose of bringing about the conditions which will make the reappearance of the Christ possible. And next we have the let's see here. To prepare the minds of men so that they may be ready for the synthetic influence of the avatar of synthesis. And that's another reason for the impression that hierarchy sends in the direction of humanity. And then finally, to stimulate the aspiration in the hearts of men so that human receptivity to the good, the beautiful, and the true may be greatly increased. Human receptivity. aspiration, and receptivity. This is the reason for the hierarchical impression. These energies will bring in the new creative era, which will sweep into expression as soon as world tension has subsided. Obviously, it has not yet subsided. Then men will be free to think and to create the new forms for the new ideals. Then they will bring into manifestation in words, in color, in music, and in sculptured form the new revelation and the new world which the coming of Christ will inaugurate. Well, this is the foreseen Renaissance, which will be of such spectacular moment. But first must come the relief or the release of humanity's consciousness so that it can be swept by this creative activity. They will bring, this arrests my attention, they will bring into manifestation the words, manifestation in words. That's maybe the first aspect of the Renaissance to manifest, in color, in music, and in sculptured form. You wonder if there is an order here. I do remember DK saying that the first art to benefit from the new Renaissance will be in words. Then they will bring this new and amazing creative period. And maybe it's not so very far off. It will be obvious to you, if you have considered my words with care, that a great spiritual movement is underway. Perhaps the greatest of all time, if we accept the great spiritual crisis which brought the fourth kingdom into being. A great spiritual movement is underway, and this will supply us with the realization of this will supply us with the confidence we need to inspire human beings with the thought of this movement. Perhaps the greatest of all time, except for individualization itself. A great movement. And do we feel that, or are we trapped in the foreground with an obsessive attention to the passing foreground of life, which looks at times so bad? I have, he says, mentioned above only 3 of the most important results for which the hierarchy hopes, and as a result of the impression that they are making on the minds and the consciousness of humanity. 3 of the most important. So, aspiration leading to receptivity to the good, the beautiful, and the true, leading to the new Renaissance. That's 1. the coming of the avatar of synthesis and the need to prepare human consciousness for the factor of synthesis, yes, and something deeper yet about which we can know very little, to bring about those conditions which will make the coming of the Christ possible. But of course, in certain measure, we have received advice concerning that. There must be sharing in process of developing between nations, communities, people. There must be peace resulting from the sharing. The sharing would not occur if not for the goodwill behind it. And in this whole process, so that receptivity can really occur, the house cleaning must take place, since cleanliness, the ridding of obstructions, is next to godliness. So the divine must have a way of getting through so that we can act upon it. So I have mentioned, he says, only 3 of the most important results for which the hierarchy hopes. Humanity is deemed to have reached a point in evolution where much can be done because the minds of men, for the first time on a worldwide scale, are sensitive to spiritual impression. The opportunity of the moment is unique because minds everywhere are showing themselves superlatively receptive to both good and evil. Men are not today governed so much by blind impulse as by considered thought. There have always been small groups and rare souls who have demonstrated the capacity to respond to spiritual impression. And that is what has been so enhanced lately, the development of the capacity to respond to spiritual impression. The line of least resistance for the masses is the selfish impulse, and there lies the major point of attack by the forces of light as they attempt to rid humanity of its innate selfishness. You know, the character of old Adam, as he is described, unredeemed man. Hierarchy under sending impression to humanity. Having humanity under impression is determined to wipe away or expel this selfishness, and it has to be rapidly done. Not everyone will achieve the second initiation, where a major blow against selfishness can be recorded. And even more selfishness is set aside at the 3rd degree until we have the truly selfless acts of the great renunciant passing through the great renunciation. Going on, the totalitarian powers have always realized and exploited this capacity of human beings to be responsive to good or bad impression. Well, it's certainly happening now. And a constant, speaking for the United States, a constant stream of lies is issuing from the place which otherwise should provide sound and safe and considerate leadership. So there are those who strictly attend to the personality promptings, who can respond and will respond to bad impression. And good impression will be a dumb note to them. They just will not respond when you're telling them how they can have more for the personality and how they can have greater power over others who are considered inferior to them. Then they will respond. Otherwise, they will reject. By impressing certain doctrines, certain principles, and certain beliefs on their people, and by withholding the truth or the facts and ignoring the realities, they contrive to swing their people into an acceptance, which means for the controlling initiators, immense power. Well, we see this demagoguery working out right now in various countries, but sadly, and especially in the United States, which should have a great attractiveness to the Christ with its second ray Aquarian soul. Somewhere, once he externalizes or reappears, he'll have to set up his headquarters. I think that the United States and the United Kingdom, each with their second ray souls, would be likely locales for his headquarters, and thus the attack from within and without, present today, the year's 2020. Other nations, the so-called democracies, DK is under no illusion about the degree of democracy which exists within them, are in a state of great confusion, split into political, religious, and social parties. Listening to the teaching, the dreams, and the plans of every person who has an idea and thrusts himself forward into the public consciousness, having no true or good policy, tainted by selfishness, personal or national, and sometimes both, and demanding the settlement of material affairs, with small attention, if any, to the recognized goals and values. Well, this is a confusion of the democracies. So under hierarchical impression, this confusion is meant to end, and the issues are meant to be seen clearly, if they can be. What really is leadership? Who shall the people follow? Well, sometimes the loudest and most selfishness-inducing voices they follow. And this is something right now that we have to deal with. Okay. There is, fortunately, a growing body of those of all faiths, or of no religious faith, to be found in every continent and nation, who are aware of the stirring of this spiritual movement, linking humanity and the hierarchy. And not too long after all of this was written, the numbers began to multiply tremendously. And people became part of the consciousness movement. It appears not to have abided, but it did good work. And many people were lifted into greater sensitivity as a result of it. It came from the east to the west, just the way occultism is meant to travel, from the east to the west. So this growing number of people who have spirituality at heart are a leaven for the rest of humanity and set an example which many can now follow. They would not be able to do it if the people in the consciousness movement had not come forward. Okay. So this growing body of those of all faiths, or of no religious faith at all, they are aware of the stirring of this spiritual movement. You know, the great teaching seems to have come from the East, but it seems to me that hierarchy was behind this movement, which occurred in the 60s and 70s. The beginning of it really occurring in the decades which DK discussed and foresaw, the 50s, 60s, 70s. The 60s were the strongest evidence of a new movement. And I think many of us owe much to that movement that awakened us to spiritual life in an even more immediate manner. So there are many who are thus aware. This is due to their reaction to spiritual hope, says the Tibetan, to the expectancy and to the curiosity, curiously widespread belief that divine intervention is possible and at hand. As the momentum of the spiritual activity develops, so will the responsiveness among men develop, and if the reaction is that which is hoped for, it will be the masses everywhere who will slowly unite to bring about the conditions needed for the reappearance of the Prince of Peace, bringing with him the potency and the benediction of the avatar of synthesis. So it's the little people that really count in this great sea change. Without bringing them along, very little could be accomplished. We see that in the example of those who presently react only to that which promises their personality more success. They react to those words that promise that success. But we are talking about an entirely different group of people that has begun to operate in connection with soul energies and soul values. And are they still with us? Yes, they are. Maybe not so dramatically as in the 60s, which was something of a revolution, but they have formed many organizations within the new group of world servers. And they are here in thousands of such relatively small organizations, wishing, hoping, planning for, acting upon the best for humanity. So anyway, they are what DK calls semi-enlightened. The number of these semi-enlightened people is growing fast. Desperation is hastening their response to help from on high. When things are difficult enough, they look upward. Master Moria has talked about the forces of evil surrounding the disciple. The only way to look then is upward. And in due time, their numbers will be so great that totalitarianism as well as chaotic democracy will not be able to stand against them. Well, now we've had some years, and we know there are just many organizations who are working for the welfare of humanity. Too many for any of us to hold in our minds, but there is still a great awakening and maybe a better establishing of these organizations, which so dramatically made their presence noticed during the 1960s. These organizations must become institutionalized, not rigid, but institutionalized so they cannot be easily swept away by the tide of negativity which inevitably arises when sufficient numbers of people try to do something good for humanity. This, he tells us, is no visionary dream with which I am presenting you. It involves hard business sense on the physical plane, a practical common sense, a cessation of the constant presentation of a beautiful future in a mythical heaven of idleness and uselessness. I think DK is referring to the uses of David Chan, which he somewhat explains. Because we build, to put it simply, we build up faculty which can be used in the next incarnation when we sojourn in Devachan. So all of these practicalities are involved in the general improvement of the human condition, helping us to bring in the kingdom of God manifested upon the earth. What is it? The expression of the soul in large numbers of human beings. The bringing in of the kingdom of God, the preparation for the coming of the Christ, and the salvaging of mankind demand courage, organization, business acumen, psychology, and persistence. It needs trained workers and much money. It calls for carefully considered programs possessing long-range vision plus sensible modern procedures. It is to this that all with true vision and a love of humanity are called today. It means the spreading of an intelligently cultivated goodwill, and the fostering of those conditions, attitudes, and points of view which will inevitably bring about right human relations. All these things are required of those who really want to help. The problems can be solved. Where there is a will, there is a way. And if we can blend the higher speculations with lower practicality via the Antakarana, connecting personality, soul, and triad, then we are well on our way to the necessary solutions. Trained workers and much money. Plus sensible modern procedures. I do remember, Mary Bailey, very practical woman, always speaking of whether things were sensible or not. Perhaps it's the British way, and the common sense of the British group. It is to this that all with true vision and a love of humanity are called today. It means the spreading of an intelligently cultivated goodwill and the fostering of those conditions, attitudes, and points of view which will inevitably bring about right human relations. Right human relations, we understand, is a great theme of Shambhala, but we just read how the Tibetan's ashram, among the 5, that is moving rapidly towards externalization, is particularly responsible for inducing or spreading the tendency towards right human relations. I think the masters are very busy, and they occupy themselves with far more than one line of endeavor on behalf of humanity. The Tibetan is so diversified as a teacher and healer and humanitarian or philanthropist with respect to the great wisdom, and also we have learned with the induction of right human relations. That's something that is something that I wish to impress upon myself, upon you. I have not been sufficiently impressed by it. And when working with the Tibetan, one must remember that particular kind of energy coming out of his ashram. So the great love energy with Master Kutumi, the synthesis and political sense of right direction coming with Master Moria, and the development of the labor unions on behalf of the workers, or at least seeing to the welfare of the workers. That's the 3rd ray, connected with the English master. And then number 7, the 7th ray, under the supervision of Master R, helping to organize many factors on the physical plane, which will allow for the optimal expression of the other rays. And then Master DK's ashram, a second ray ashram, but a subsidiary. It's not the great ray ashram run by Master Kutumi, but is a subsidiary and expresses this energy of right human relations. So DK goes on, I would call your careful attention to one most important matter. The moment that a point of balance is reached, the moment that those who stand for separateness and materialism, for totalitarianism, or for any imposed regime, and consequently an evil unity, and those who stand for the freedom of the human soul, for the rights of the individual, for brotherhood and right human relations, are equal in force, that point of balance, making them equal in force, in position and influence, then the doors of the hierarchy, symbolically speaking, will open, and the Christ with his disciples will come. Now, obviously, the good and the good conditions here listed do not yet equal humanity's evil and selfish tendencies. So balance opens the door. Let's put that in. Balance opens the door. Hierarchy. I keep on saying I'll do it, but in this case, I do not benefit by getting 5 of the letter E in one stroke. Okay, this balance, and now Libra being the sign of balance, and also ruling supermind or triadal mind has to be brought into consideration. This balance has to reach a point upon mental levels. It has to be reached by those who can think, who can influence, and in whose hands lies the responsibility for what the masses below and below the mental level know and believe. So there are groups of thinkers for whom it is a responsibility to bring the masses into a more knowing and rightly believing state, inducing more knowing and rightly ridiculous. Major computer repair coming up. But I'm so eager to charge ahead that I suffer the loss of time through malfunction. The unskilled laborer, the numerous people who never think, who are only young in the experience of incarnation, and the multitudes who evade thought, even when they are capable of it, lie in the hands of 2 vast and dominant groups, the totalitarians and the democracies. So these are the fodder which can be used to nourish either one of these tendencies, totalitarianism or democracy. Well, we are where we are, and many people just are not to the point where they appreciate the value of democracy and the freedoms that democracy brings. They are still authoritarian in their consciousness or wish to be guided by authoritarians. It's an early development stage. The parent directs, and the child is not independent. And this accounts for millions upon millions of people. So the question is, who will direct and rule them and the tendencies that they will follow? In the United States at this time, the people who appreciate totalitarianism are in significant numbers, but still less, fortunately, than those who are more grown up and independent. And maybe that is the case with a number of countries. You will always have those who are, at least at this time, susceptible to totalitarianism, the imposition of standardization and the wiping out of the contributions which each could individually make if he or she were not standardized. But of course, with standardization, control by the totalitarian leaders is easier of attainment, and they wish to have the power of the masses do their bidding. So, the consequences of attaining a point of balance are very close today. Now, as I say, 72 years ago, organized evil, I mean, there is evil, but organized evil is not in power. Organized good is still quite ineffective, largely owing to the failure of the religions of the world to give a true picture of Christ's mission. Therefore, the struggle for control is with us now. Is it still with us? You know, we have to, people will say, well, that's such an old book, you know, that let's get modern here and not pay attention to things which passed long ago. But the consequences of choices are with us now. And there are many who try to escape from freedom into an authoritarian state of mind where the response of acquiescence is given to authoritarian, totalitarian leaders. So we are ineffective, and the forces of evil more easily effective at first than the forces of good are not in power. Now, there are consequences here if things should go the wrong way. If the forces of evil plus the groups of men who seek control of the human spirit, you know, in a way occultly trapping the volatile essence as it seeks to escape into larger areas of expression, So if the forces of evil, plus the groups of men who seek control of the human spirit, no matter in what country they are found, and they can be found in every single country without exception, become dominant, the doors of evil will open and the life of men will lose its meaning. I'm reminded of the logotherapy of Viktor Frankl. It was the therapy of meaning. He was in the concentration camps as a Jewish psychologist, sociologist, and he made the great observation that the survivors were those who had meaning in their life. So the doors of evil will open and the life of man will lose its meaning. Things will be unrelated to other things and goals will not be understood, and materialism will prevail. And as DK says here, death will settle down upon our planet, both spiritual and mental, such as would have been the case had the Nazis prevailed. If the forces of good working through the new group of world servers and the activities of men of goodwill everywhere prevail, the doors of the spiritual hierarchy will open, and to use a biblical phrase, the hosts of the Lord will issue forth. His initiates, his masters, his accompanying angels of very high degree, and the Christ will come. Well, it sounds a little iffy, doesn't it? Of course, this was written 72 years ago. And so we cannot yet tell. We know that the forces of evil are not in control, and I think we know that the forces of good are still not organized as they should be. Now, this takes us to the next large section concerning the organization or organizing the ashrams into form on Earth. So this is just about an hour, and we've come to page 652, wherever we started from, and we'll find out. Yes. 648 to 652. So let's come down here to the end of this section, which conveniently could be reported upon in just about an hour. So it worked well. Okay. Let's see how we do this here. Yeah. And I'll put the orienting notes here, approximately 1 hour and a few minutes, maybe. 648 to 652. And the day is the 17th of June, 2020, and we'll begin with number 85. Whoops. And we don't know, say approximately 1 hour. And hopefully we will be in a position to start today, the 17th of June. I think what we witness is that humanity is making its own decisions, and victory is probable, perhaps, but not certain. And it is possible for humanity to turn in the wrong direction and bring about a period of stultification, the death of the mind, the death of consciousness, and probably the death of those who stand for the good, just as the Nazis tried to wipe out those churchmen who would not cooperate with them and would not see their way. So this materialism and death and oppression and the cessation temporarily of progress, all this was possible. And now, 72 years later, we ask, is it still possible? We certainly see the turn towards dictatorship and megalomania and the extreme selfish self-concern of those in power in a number of nations. The leaders of some countries are not the best leaders that could be summoned out of the general populace of the countries they lead. And all of this is due to ignorance and the personality focus of the electorate, and that personality focus is due to the lack of proper education, which has, well, the word is sometimes used, dumbed down the electorate. And an unintelligent electorate, or an electorate in which a significant number of people are unintelligent, instinctual, emotional, selfish, is not a great harbinger for wise decisions. So that's where we stand, still in the balances. 5 years remain for the conclave, at which very important decisions will be made regarding the timing of the actual externalization of the masters and their initiates and their preparation for that moment when the Christ will decide to reappear, because certain standards will have been met. These are exciting times, critical times for humanity. It's not an uneventful period, it's a directionally determining period. And we want to make the right decisions so that the beneficent prophecies can be fulfilled sooner rather than later. And the suffering of humanity reduced and the potentials of humanity fulfilled, again, sooner rather than later, and the movement towards planetary sacredness hastened upon its way. Humanity plays over the coming years an important part in the initiation of the planet and its hastening towards sacredness. Okay, so our next work will be program 85, maybe sometime a little later today, organizing the ashrams into form on Earth. At least we know now what ashrams are going to send in their representatives and perhaps be represented by the master who is the monadic point at the heart of every ashram. There will be appearing masters. And it's interesting that some of those who have written voluminously, like the Tibetan and Master Morya, will be, I think, appearing masters, either sooner, as in the case of the Tibetan, or later, probably, as in the case of Master Morya. As for Master Rakotsi, Master R, he has the tendency to show up. He has the tendency to work on the outer plane as he did in the classical period. I'm not sure what to say about the English master, but we are dealing with the third ray there, and that is the ray of manifestation. And I think probably Master Kuthumi will hold back for some time before emerging. You kind of let the servants come in first and establish the right conditions. And that's who we are. We are the servants, we are the servers. And to the best of our ability, we are trying to establish right conditions for the appearance of our superiors, the chiefs, who can be tremendously impactful on whatever plane with which they choose to engage. Okay, now that's it. And we'll work ahead. Not so many pages left. Maybe another 50 pages of computer text. And then back to the beginning of the book, where we can find things of importance and relevance, even if not so immediately involved in the politics, the social condition of the present. So lots of love, many blessings, study hard, meditate deeply, and get rid of whatever's in the way of the kind of impression which is now increasingly available from the higher sources. The house cleaning, so we make sure that our house is not filled with a new batch of devils once we have made some effort to clean it out, because the devils have a way of looking for entry and persisting. So let us get rid of them through occult hygiene, we might call it. Okay. We'll see you a little later. This is to stop the recording. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.